Chapter 8. The Dragon. Shen Su paused, searching the ground before him. The goat path he was following had tightened, and with the steady falling snow, he was having a hard time discerning whether he was still on a path of any sort, or merely rambling aimlessly through the woods, no closer to his friends, perhaps further away than he had been 10 minutes ago. He fought to stop the rapid descent into chaos his mind was inviting him to enter. He knew the first step down that path was the easiest, but like any quagmire, dragging yourself out of despair was a supreme test of will. He took a breath. He exhaled the fear. He took another deep inhale and pressed on. He was on the path. He had to be. It would not be far now. He forced himself to appreciate the cold. He was glad the weather had turned and that he was not attempting this feat on Good Friday's climate. When Good Friday morning arrived, it came on hot and humid, like midday July in Beijing. The blue tunics of the CLC men were sweat through before they finished breakfast. Sue spent the morning scouring the food line, searching out candidates for Sergeant Lee's impending mission. He picked out 5 of the strongest men he could find and had them follow him to Sergeant Lee's tent, along with Chang, whose skinny arms and slight shoulders looked comically out of place amongst the big men. Li Peng sized them up and nodded his approval. When he got to Chang, he smiled and wrinkled his forehead wry. "You sure you're up for this, little fellow?" "We'll see, Sergeant." Chang smiled. "A philosopher. I suppose we can always use one of those." Zi Chang grinned. "Shen Su is the philosopher, Sergeant Lee, not me." The 8 men piled into the back of a canvas-covered truck bed and bounced away over the potholes and cobblestones of an ancient Roman road, grinding gears and rolling west toward what sounded like an incoming thunderstorm. "Where are we going, Sergeant Lee?" asked Chang. Li Ping smiled, grim. "You'll see." It took most of the day to reach their destination. On the teeth-jarring ride, Sue watched the world through a rectangle of stiff canvas at the back end of the truck bed. It slowly transformed from a country made of vibrant colours of oncoming springtime to muddy browns, flat blacks, and ugly mauvish greys. Occasionally they saw men and vehicles headed the other direction. At one point Sue thought they passed 2 white men with a caged lion in their horse-drawn wagon, but he figured the vision must have been caused by fumes from the lorry engine that were pumping out of the tailpipe and floating under the canvas awning, making his stomach heave ungently as it asked to bring his breakfast back up and out. He choked it down, along with fear that was building as the sounds of war got louder. By the time the truck's drum brakes shrieked and pulled the conveyance to a halt, the sun was nearing the western horizon, and the rattle of battle had reached a steady roar. Sue glanced across at Chang. His new friend was 3 or 4 shades too pale. You could tell that Chang was in some intestinal distress, swallowing a lot of hot, bitter saliva every couple of seconds. The thought of it made Sue choke back his own gorge again. He had to look away. Sergeant Lee stood up. "Okay, laborers. Time to earn your money." He hefted a large rucksack, then stepped through the canvas rectangle and dropped to the mud. Sue, Chang, and the other 5 followed with the opposite amount of certainty. When Zi Chang hit the ground, he was able to hold his vomit in for 1 step, then 2, then it exploded out of him, projectiling into the mud. As a loud convoy of Red Cross trucks began moving past them, Sergeant Lee bent down and looked in Chang's eyes. "You gonna be okay, Chang?" Chang nodded and spat viscous saliva away. "Yes, Sergeant Lee. Feeling much better now." Li Peng patted his shoulder. "Lesson of the day. If you can make it to lunch, skip breakfast. A lot of days it's going to be a meal your body tries to make you see twice." Sue saw a British sergeant stinking in the heat, his ruddy face shining with sweat, slogging through the thick mud toward them. "You lot the Labour Court chinks?" he asked, over the roar of trucks grinding their gears. Li Peng was the only one who spoke English. He smiled. "You the limey twat who can't get your playthings out of the mud?" The limey twat was taken aback. "What'd you say, mate?" Sergeant Lee's face was newborn baby innocent. "I say, we here to get your tank out of the mud, boss." "What do you think I said, boss?" "You got some pretty good English." "For a chink, I do just fine. Your English could use some help." "What?" "Your English tank could use some help, I hear." The sergeant was pretty sure that was not what Li Peng said the first time, but he had not slept more than an hour or two at a stretch in 14 days, and was worn thin and brittle as a stale cracker. The German barrage the night before had pushed him closer to breaking than he had thus far been, so he ignored any additional input that might flick him carelessly over the edge. "Right. Follow me. Keep your heads down, you want to keep them attached to your necks. Stay on the duckboards, you don't want to drown in the mud." Li Peng turned to Su, Chang, and 5 strong Chinese men who were beginning to hate Shen Su for volunteering them for the day's labor. "Okay, keep on the wooden tracks. Mud out here is deep enough to drown you, slow and ugly. We're going to follow this shitbag to his broken tank. Then we're going to get it out of its predicament. Then we're going to get back in that truck and go home. Understood?" "What kind of tank? A water tank? A fuel tank?" asked Chang. Li Peng shrugged. "Neither. They call it a tank. I don't know why. I call it a fire-breathing dragon. Stay close, keep your heads down. He says it's dangerous up ahead." The British sergeant led them through the reserves, past ranks of filthy, exhausted infantrymen trying to catch a quick nap or a cigarette on the muddy ground. As they approached a small ridge, a support trench, cut from the earth, opened up before them. They followed its angling descent until the sandbags rose up on both sides of them, dulling the sounds of bullets whistling overhead and the occasional whiz-bang of German artillery shells hurtling in. The trenches quickly began zigzagging. As they turned a sharp corner, the sound of gunfire, rending the air, struck them. A line of British infantrymen was on the fire step, ranging their Enfield SMLEs over the battlements and hurling rifle rounds at an invisible enemy. Su saw Li Peng look up at them. The lightness with which he began the day was gone. His expression had taken on a grim tone. "Everything okay, Sergeant?" asked Chang. He had seen the look too. Sergeant Lee nodded. "More action than I thought there would be. But as the Canadians say, what cannot be cured must be endured." They turned the next corner. The rifleman's calls doled away in the distance as the bark of a Hotchkiss machine gun team at the apex of the next trench corner drowned it out. All they could see were the backs of 2 men working in tandem behind a steel armor plate that shrouded the business end of the gun. They swept the MG back and forth. Its staccato roar sounded like some hellish sewing machine's rattle. Good heavens, said Chang. It was something his mother used to say all the time when she came upon he and his older brothers fighting in the yard. Sue patted his shoulder. They came to a section of the trench that had been blown to bits by a direct shell hit. There were still blackened remnants of men, nearly unrecognizable, buried in likewise blackened sandbags and twists of barbed wire. The British sergeant stopped there. "You'll come out of the trench here. Tank's about 50 yards out. Bosch been trying to get to her too. Want to see if they can't take her home, eh? Once the bastard artillery boys start their barrage, we'll advance and form a perimeter west of the tank. You lot will follow us, get her up and running, then fall back," he said. Sergeant Lee considered. "Where's the crew?" The Brit shrugged. "Still in the cockpit. Dead as doornails, far as I know." Peng nodded. "Does it have petrol?" "What to? It didn't get but that 50 yards before she shat to bed and died. Ain't been running since." "Tools? She'll be full set in the belly." "Tracks intact?" asked Li Peng. "What? Did it slip a track? You mean them wheelie things on the side?" Li Peng nodded. "No, like I said, it just ain't running. If I could tell you why, I could fix it myself, right?" Sergeant Lee took a small trench periscope out of his rucksack. He put the aperture over the lip of the blown trench and looked out at the battlefield beyond. He took a breath and held it a millisecond longer than was natural before putting the periscope aside. Sergeant Lee turned to Sue, Chang, and the others. He pointed to them in turn, starting with Sue and ending with Chang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are your numbers. When the sun sets, we're going to head out, try to get this thing running. 1, 2, and 3, you're coming with me. Chang, you're my lucky number 7. You stay here with this." He handed Zi Chang the periscope. "If one of us gets hit, number 4 is going to come join us at the tank. If 2 of us get hit, number 5 is going to come running then. He falls, number 6 is up. 4 of us get hit, Chang. You're up and over those sandbags, and you sure as hell better not get hit. Takes 4 men to drive that tank once we got it running. You'll be all I've got. Understood?" Chang was glad he had already thrown up. There was nothing left inside to come out. He nodded. What if you get hit, Sergeant Lee?" Li Peng smiled. "If I get hit, none of you knows how to fix a tank. I guess it'll mean you have to drag it out of there by hand, eh? She's pretty heavy. Maybe best if you say some prayers that I don't get hit." Shensu paused at the fork in the snowy trail. He recognized the large rock at its apex. He leaned up against it and took in a deep breath. He was on the right path. His prayers had not been answered in the affirmative on Good Friday, but it looked like his current ones had not been entirely ignored. Not far now. He pushed off the rock and carried on.